Hi there. In this video, we're going to talk about correlation, or also known as the correlation coefficient. So remember, we're talking about paired quantitative x and y values. So we have two variables that are both quantitative or numerical, and it's also only works for linear patterns, okay? You can get a correlation for a curved pattern, but it won't be meaningful. It won't tell you what you think it tells you. It won't tell you what you want it to tell you. Okay, so correlation coefficient is denoted by the letter R, okay? And what this does is it measures the strength of a relationship. Okay, so let's learn more about this. Okay, so first of all, a caution. Even if there's a really strong correlation, that doesn't mean there's a causation, right? So even if it appears that y can be predicted from x, it does not follow that x causes y. Okay, so you may have also heard the phrase correlation does not mean causation. Okay, so we'll be talking more about that. Okay, there's some characteristics of the value of R. The first one I mentioned, it only makes sense for linear relationships, okay? And it's a value between -1 and 1. So this is one of the few statistics that does not have units. So there are no, that's my third thing, I was just going to write it. R has no units, okay? So I know I'm a big unit hound, but there's nothing we can put on R. It's just a number between -1 and 1. And then the sign of R is also the direction of the association. So it tells us the strength, but it actually also kind of tells us the direction. We don't need the direction so much from the correlation as we do need an objective measure of the strength. So like I was talking about in the last video, if you zoom in or out, the data points might look closer together or further apart. So we need an objective measure to tell what the strength is. And so the sign of R is the direction of the association, okay? So if R is positive, then it's a positive association. If R is negative, it's a negative. Okay, so it tells us the strength and it also tells us the direction. Okay, so here I've got a number line going from -1 to 1, and I've got a 0 in the middle. So 0 would be absolutely no correlation. Absolutely no pattern whatsoever, no correlation. So when we were drawing our scatter plots, it would look something like this. Okay, you could also think if we put a line through that, it might have just like no slope, it'd just be a flat line. Okay, now 1 or -1 would be perfect correlations, okay? So if we were to graph something in a linear formula that was actually perfect, you'd get a correlation of 1. Now this shouldn't happen in real life. Real data shouldn't be exactly perfect, but if something was coming from an actual equation, it would look like a perfect straight line. So 1 would be a perfect positive correlation. Or like perfect positive line. And then -1 would be a perfect negative line, or I'll say correlation on this one. Or perfect relationship. So we're going to be somewhere in the middle, okay? It's pretty rare to get 0. It's pretty rare to get +1 or -1. So what I've heard is kind of like a guideline of 0.5, and different textbooks or different authors might vary on this. What I've heard is about 0 to 0.5 or -0.5 as being a weak correlation. 0 to 0.5 on the positive side or the negative side. The positive and negative, so that's just the direction. The -0.5 or +0.5 would be equal in terms of the strength, but it just means one is going up, the points are going up, and one, the points are going down. So this one would have a positive correlation, and this one would have a negative correlation where the points are going down from left to right. Okay, and then the next guideline I've heard is roughly 0.8. That's kind of a moderate. Moderate strength or moderate correlation. And then from 0.8 to 1 is strong. And this is not a percentage either, so it's absolutely no units. Strong. If you've ever learned about R squared, that is a percentage, but we're not going to be doing R squared in our class. Once again, there's a lot more to learn about this, and there's more statistics classes for that. So let's practice with correlation. So there's a really fun applet, and I've got the link for you in D2L. And here is a little screenshot of one. So what it is there are 4 random scatter plots, and then there are 4 correlations, and they're the same values in all 4, so it's like a matching, and you can use the process of elimination. So I've got an example here. We'll do this example after we play with the applet for a bit. So let me go ahead and get to the applet. Okay, so this is a different one because it's randomized. So this is a different one that's on the paper. Okay, so let's practice this, and you can try it on your own if you wish. First, okay, so remember how the stronger correlation is going to be a tighter pattern, right? So I would probably assume that these are all in the same scale. Let me go back to our notes right here. So closer to 1 or -1 is going to be a really strong or tight pattern. Okay, so this upper right is very tight and it's going down. So that's probably the strongest -1. So I'm going to say that's probably -0.99. You can't get much stronger than that without being perfect. And then we have a positive, that's actually only one positive one that's going up from left to right. So I'm going to click that one, that's 0.96. Here's a negative direction, and it's weaker than our 0.99, but it's not as weak as the one below it. The one below it is more spread out, but still negative. Okay, so between these two, I think I can identify that this upper left one is -0.94 because it's not quite as strong as the 0.99. And then there's our other possibility is -0.63. So that's more in the moderate range there. So once you match all your graphs, go ahead and click check answers, and it'll give you either a little green smiley face or it might give you a red X if you didn't get it. So that's okay. We're just learning. It will keep your score down here. And I haven't figured out how to do this group competition, so I can't figure out how to get signed up to get that ID, but maybe someday I'll figure it out. So I'm going to click on Get New Plots, and we try it again. And now, sometimes you'll get two that are just, because it's random, you'll get two that are just so close you can't even tell, and I can't even tell the difference. So don't worry if you don't get those right, or you can just, hit check answers and do a new one. These, this is actually a good example. The upper right and lower left look very similar to each other. They're both going positive, but I think the upper right is a little more spread out than the lower right. I want to pick out this negative right off the bat. There's only one negative in our choices, and there's only one that's decreasing from left to right. So that's our -0.85. And then I like to go with the strongest one. So I can see the strongest one has the tightest pattern. That's going to be the highest positive number, 0.87. And then what's left is 0.55 and 0.66. So there is a fair difference. To me, the upper right looks a little more spread out. So I'm going to say that's the lower one. Remember, lower, closer to 0 is less strong. And then this looks a little tighter to me, so I'm going to say that's the higher of the 2.66. We'll see if I get it right or not. Okay, I did. Let's do one more. Okay, we've got another one. These two are pretty close on the right, and the two on the left are fairly close as well. Oh, except on the right, even though these are pretty weak on the right, one is generally positive and one is generally negative. So you can see the ones on the upper graph are increasing, and then the ones on the lower are decreasing. So I'm going to say that this really spread out one is the smallest negative one. That's negative 0.39. That's pretty weak. And then the only positive option we have is 0.41. Okay, that gives us two options for the kind of moderate to strong negative ones we have here. They're both pretty tightly clustered and very definitely negative. So we have negative 0.88 and negative 0.91. So pretty strong. Pretty strong. So I think this upper left one is a little tighter. So I'm going to say that's the negative 0.91 and this is the negative 0.88. Okay, great. So play with that a few times, and then let's go back to the notes, and let's do this one so you have it on your notes. So the one that's printed in the notes has, let's see, the upper left is positive, upper right is positive, lower left is negative, and lower right is positive. So we've got 3 positives and 1 negative. So I'm going to match the negative one right away because that's the only negative. Okay, now we've got to decide between the 3 positive ones. Which one looks the strongest to you? Okay, if you said the lower right, I agree. That one looks the strongest. So this is a strong positive. Those dots are the most tightly formed together in a line. Okay, and then our 2 middle options are 0.82 and 0.63. So which one looks stronger to you, the upper left or the upper right? I would say the upper left looks stronger. So I'm going to say that is 0.82. And then the upper right is kind of a moderate. Yeah, moderate. Positive. Okay, by my number line, the 0.82 is still strong. I'm going to say moderate to strong. Because it's kind of on the borderline. Moderate to strong, positive. Okay. Okay, so one more thing. I want to go to the next page because we put in some data to make a scatter plot of the drug usage in the US and some countries in Western Europe. So let me switch my page real quick. Okay, so here's the first page where we made our scatter plot, and we have the data right here. And then on this notes page, I have directions for you in using Applet. So we've already done part of this. We're going to click on Calculate Correlation. Okay, so let me go back to the applet. Okay, so we had already been this far. We put in our names, our titles for the X and Y variable. We put in our data. We hit begin analysis. We got this lovely scatter plot. But I don't know, without seeing the number, what is it strong? It looks fairly strong to maybe moderate, but let's see. So the next button down is Calculate Correlation. So it's great. It's a great app to use. And it is very strong. So 0.9341. So I'm going to write that down. Oh, you may have seen I had it printed on the notes as part of my screenshot right there. So that is a strong association. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can go ahead and explain or write using our 4-part framework. We can go ahead and describe this association, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to do our 4 things from the other second notes page, where we're going to talk about the direction, the form, the strength, and unusual features. Okay? Okay, so first let's put in our context. Okay, so I'm going to say the association. You could say association or relationship. Both of those are kind of used equally just to mean the general relationship. So I'll say association. The association between, and remember what our variables were. The percentage of teens who use marijuana, between the percentage of teens who use marijuana and other drugs is, so rather than spell out or write out the percentage of teens for both, I spelled it out once because that's common to both. Okay, so for direction, it looks like it is positive, right? It's definitely going up. And we wrote that on the other page. So it's positive. What's our form? Does it look like a straight line? Is it linear or is it curved? It looks fairly linear to me. I did mention there's these 3 down here that is that kind of a curve at the end, but I think we'll see what happens when we actually put a straight line on here, but it does look fairly linear to me. Positive, linear, and strong, with a correlation of 0.9341. So that just gives our evidence that it is a strong relationship. And now the last thing is unusual features. So I just want to mention that. Are there any, does anything look unusual to you? Are there any outliers? Are there any gaps? Are there any groupings? The only thing that looks interesting to me are these 3 dots together. So I might just mention that grouping. Otherwise, I'd say no unusual features, but these are very close. So I'm curious what countries these are. So these would be around 5. They're very low on both, right? So I'm curious what countries these are and why is that happening? How do they make that happen? So we have a 5, 6, and 7, and they all have, let's see, 1, 3, 3, yeah. So it's Finland, Norway, and Portugal. So I'm going to say there's a grouping. There's a grouping with very low drug usage. And I'm going to list those: Finland, Norway, and Portugal. Okay. I'd be curious to look at what their social policies are, things like that. Okay, so that is it for correlation, and we will talk about, in the next video, we'll talk about line of best fit. Okay, see you there.